Hi everybody, John Mather from Caressius Productions, and welcome back to our second video in the series of creating our own Headway plugins slash blocks. So if you remember from the first video, we started off downloading the template files and editing them to create our very first block, which we uploaded and activated, and if we remember from the back end, it didn't actually do anything. So if I were to delete the titles and delete this color out of here and hit save, you'll see there is absolutely nothing in this block. So let's have a think about what we want to do. If you remember rightly, we were going over to, let's just follow the links. We were looking at creating buttons that allow us to do this sort of effect. So let's just have a look at one of these. Let's get an idea for what we want to create. Let's do one of these icon ones for starters. So let's go inspect this element, and let's have a look at the code in this one. So probably not a good source idea. Let's open inspect this one. Here we go. So you can see it's a href, so with a link. There's no link in there. It's got the class of wobble vertical, and then it's got the title. So let's just go and edit as HTML. Let's jump into our notepad where I've still got my 3 blocks open. I'm just going to open a new one. I'm just going to give this the HTML tags purely for the HTML syntax. Just going to go language HTML code. We all know, hopefully you should know, that's not the correct way to start a HTML page, but this is just, as I said, just to give me the syntax. So that's the actual button there. So in the site, we might put this within a div, which we would call Headway button, perhaps, or maybe just Headway button, just to give it the class, and then we would close off the div. So if we were to set this up in HTML, that's exactly how we would set it up. So let's just copy that, and let's jump over to our block file, which, if you remember rightly, this is the Headway button block PHP was for WordPress for uploading and activating the plugin. Block options is where we work in for the configuring the block, so in the grid mode, and the block is for our front end, which is our content, and our elements, which is for our design in our visual editor. So we're working on the front end, so that'll go in the content block. So we are working in a PHP file, so the HTML classes won't work in this file. Just add some tabs in there just to break it down. So what we need to do in a PHP file is we need to echo. So echo the HTML onto the screen, which we do that simply by doing that. So we add echo, apostrophe, and then at the end of the line we close the apostrophe, semicolon. We do that for all 3 lines we just added there. And that is it. So let's Control Alt Control C. We'll just hit save on that as well. But we'll head over to our backend and we'll just click on Editor in our plugins. And I'm only got the one plugin installed, so otherwise you would need to check the plugin and choose the block PHP file, which is just there. Control Alt Control V. I'll just double check that that all looks right before I hit save. Update, because if I update this and it's not right, it'll break my site. And there we go. So that's edited successfully. So now if we go to our block and we hit refresh, we have a link. Oops, and it's actually wobbling. And the reason it's wobbling is because when I was doing my test, I have loaded the scripts for the font, awesome, and the hover. I'm just going to delete them now, so because we won't be using them for our plugins. Well, we will, but not in this way. And let's just hit refresh, and now it won't hover. Now it's just so you can see how in the in this block how it outputted it. So it echoed onto the screen the class Headway button, the A link and close the div. So if we go in and look at the site, at the actual site, and we'll inspect the element here, that's exactly what we'll see. So we can see we've got the block content, then we've got the headway button that we created, the div, and then we've got our A file, and then we've got our div. So let's have a look. Alright, so what's one of the first things we notice that we want to do? We want to be able to get our end user, the designer, to be able to, they need to be able to add that class in. They want to be able to title their button. They want to be able to choose their link. That's the starter. So we give it that class, that's our class, so we define that, so that doesn't matter what you call it, but this one is what works in here. So these are all the ones we're going to need to use, and the customer is going to have to be able to choose in that class just there. So wobble is the wobble effect, etc, etc. So let's jump in and have a look at how that works. Let's start working on the configuration backend. So I just did this just to highlight how it's going to get an idea of how we want it to present on the screen, so we know what the customer is going to want to use, how we're going to style this, how we're going to configure it, what are we going to do. Alright, so but let's have a look. So in the content tabs, I'm just going to open a previous block I've built. I should have one here. Headway shortcodes, block options. Let's have a look. So you can see how it works here. So we've got a content tab, content, and then we've got all our different styling in here. So what we want to do is we want to add a content tab. We only need the one tab. So let's add that in. And then in our inputs, we can see we've got an array for our content tab in there. And I'll just cover off more of that in a second. So we need to close that array. So we close that with the closing bracket and the semicolon. So let's have a look at this. So the public tabs, that creates our tabs. So in our visual editor, these are our tabs. Alright, so the public tabs creates the tab. The public inputs, so that's a config tab, and these are all the inputs. Alright, so that's where we will spend most of our time tonight, is we're going to get this end set up. We're going to work on our block options. So let's hit save and let's have a look at that. So we'll just Control C back into my editor. And in our block options, we'll just paste that in there. Oh, and we've got an error on line 13. Okay, so I worked out what my error was in this tab. It was because I put a semicolon instead of a comma. So we needed to, because that wasn't that was a child array. So it wasn't the main array. So that was all that error was. But let's go back in and refresh our page now. Open our block options, and we can see now we've got a content tab. So when we created that plugin, we created the content tab and we gave it an area to place some content, but we didn't actually put any content in there. So let's go and add the content in here. So this is what we're going to be using. So the first thing we might want is a URL link. But we want to be a little bit more descriptive than that, so we'll call it a Headway button URL link. If we look over here, you can see here it's an array. So I'll just show you how that will look. So let's just copy that. We don't need that one. Let's just grab one here. That's too messy. Let's have a look. So So the button URL will equal array, and in that array, I'll show you if we head over to Headway, so docs.headwaythemes.com article block API. If we jump down to, scroll down to, where is it? Block options. So you can see let's copy that in. So the type is going to be a text, so that's the input type. So we can have drop downs, radio boxes, etc., etc. So it's going to be a text field because the end user is going to type in the text. I give the name the same as the array name, and we're going to call this URL link. So that's the title they will see. We'll have a blank, we'll load the block up blank. So you can have a default, so it'll input something there already. And then we're going to say, put your URL link here. And because that's the last one, you don't actually need to finish that off with a comma because it's the last one. But if there is more than one, if there's going to be more lines, you must finish that off with the comma. So let's copy that and let's just have a look. And then I'll just paste this in and we'll have a look at how that worked. Let's refresh, reload, open the block options, and there we go. So we've got our tooltip. We've got our URL link and we've got our input field. So let's have a look. Let's just minimize that to the side there so we can see them both. So you can see we created the content tab. In the content tab we created a URL link array. Within that array we've got a text block, which is this input field here. We've called that the Headway button URL link. So if we inspected that element, it would have that ID. We've given it a label, URL link, which is what we can visually see there. There's no default, which is why that block is blank, that input field is blank. And we've given it a tooltip, put your link here. Now I'm just going to enter some lines here, just because we're going to create a new one, because we are continually going to be working in this content tab, because we're not setting up any other tabs. So in this one we might call this one new tab, and in this one we want to make it a checkbox. I'll copy that. Sorry if I'm rushing through this pretty quick, because by the end of this it's going to all make sense, because we're going to be doing this so many times it'll start to be able to make sense. So we're going to give it a label, open a new tab. We're going to give that a option of false, a default of false, and we'll give it a tooltip of, do you want the button to open a new page? So what we're saying is we're given the end user the option to click a checkbox to choose whether they want to open it in a new tab. So straight off the bat we're going to say false, because we want to keep the client, the person that's navigating our site, we want to keep them on our site. So let's control C again. We'll paste that in there. And you can start to see this will start to take shape and hopefully start to make a little bit of sense to you. Let's open that block again, and there we go. So you can see we've got a URL link, open a new tab, yes, no, yes, no. And because it's false, it loads as checked. Let's just go back into my editor here and let's change that to true. Let's click update file, Let's hit refresh, reload this page. Let's open the block options, and because I changed it to true, it now loads up checked by default. Change that to false, click update file, click refresh, click reload, and open the block, and you can see now it's unchecked. So that's that for starters. What if we wanted to add a header to separate these into separate lines? We could do that as well. So let's jump back over to here, and I think I might have a header in here. Do I? Sure, I would have. Sure, I would have had a header in here. Select. Obviously I don't. So there we go. So we can, I thought I did, but let's see if I've got another block in here, my settings. I don't think I do on this one. Nope. So you can add a heading in there, so I'm just going to pull that up for you. Okay, so here we go. So this is our block heading array here, so it's pretty straightforward. So let's go Headway button URL heading. We give it a name, the type is heading, and button URL link. So let's copy that, Control C, jump in here, Control V. So we've got our heading, we've got our URL link, and we've got our checkbox. Let's hit update, and let's hit refresh, reload that page. And now when we open our block, we've got a header there. So let's jump into here and see how we can, how come we use headers. If I add this in under here, and we'll call this one button content heading. Button content heading, type heading, and button content. Control C to copy that again. We'll go Control V to paste that in, hit update. And now when we refresh and open our block, you can see that brings it down to a new line. Whereas if I was to, let's just comment that out, and let's add in our next field, and we want it, so we'll copy this. And we want to call this one Headway button text. And this will be a text field. Actually, what we might make that is what you see is what you know. It will be a text field. Text field. Button text, we'll call it. What should we have as our content, as our default? My button, that'll do. What do you want your button button to say. Let's go Control or Control C. Now we've commented this part out, so even though it's still in there, the program will skip over it. It won't read it. So when we hit refresh and reload our block, and we open the block options, we can see it just puts it into one long line, and it will keep cascading and overflowing in there. But you can see we've got the title button text, the default is my button, and we've got the tooltip again. But let's just go back in and edit that. I'm just going to put my capital in for the button text, and we'll delete out that comment. So I'll do that. Actually, I'll do it over here so you can see. Delete there, delete that, and change that to a capital T. Let's copy that. Let's Control or Control V and update. So where headings can come in handy, not only can you use that for useful bits of information, if you want, you can check out, you can then separate them into different lines here. So we've got the button URL link, the button content. Alright, so sometimes what we want is, if we go back to our hover CSS and scroll down a bit, we've got some font awesome icons. So we want to give our customers a way to choose the icon to put in. Okay, so what we want to do is head over to our font awesome icons, and forgive me, I just had to pause the video quickly, and let's have a look. Click on our icons here, and let's have a look at all the different icons. So we want to list these into an array for our customers to choose into a drop down. So what I've done for you is I've already created a icon list. We're going to call this Headway button icon list. Headway button icons list. And all we need to do is I'm just going to delete that top line there. Control or Control C. So the PHP was just at the top just to make sure it's all working. So we've just basically listed FA-building equals building, FA-bullseye equals bullseye. And I've just created a big list for all the available font awesomes, and then I've returned icon because I've given them all and in the icon array, and the top one is none, no icon. So we'll head over to our block options, and then I think we do it outside the class. We paste that in. So outside of that last curly brace, I'm just going to check that quickly. No, I'm wrong on that. We do it inside that last curly brace, so I'm just going to add that in there. We add that in. Alright, so that will give us our listing. So you don't have to type all that out. I will paste that code for you, and we will make this available and share it. So what we want to do now is we want to create a new array. We're going to call this button icon. We're going to call this if we head over to our block API, you will see there it is you can have multi-select. We don't, we just want a simple select, so a simple drop down. I know it's not very well laid out in there, so you got checkbox select, so we want select. So we want to make it a select. Let's copy that and change that to button icon. We're going to leave that, make that default as none, because that's our first one there, which means no icon. Do you want an icon in your button? So that should be it. And what we want to do is we want to actually add a comma onto there, and what we want to do is go options, because we want to input the options. Now what you can do, you could go in and create an options array here. You could create another array within this options, and you could type this out here. So you could do basically all that in this options array, and it will work. It will work just fine. I just find it easier for me to work with a function, because then it makes it easier for me to go in and add and adjust. I can paste all this into a spreadsheet really simply and sort it, change it to however I need. So this is the way I work. If you want to, you could put it all up here. It just keeps it all nice and neat rather than this one being that long. So it just helps keep it nice and neat for me. So I'm not going to add an array there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to call this function. And I'm pretty sure that's all I need to do. I can't quite remember whether I need to put that in closing brackets there or not. Let's have a look. Let's see, I'm just checking the highlighting there. I'm just going to pause this for a second. And yes, I'm correct. That is, you do need to put it in those exclamation marks there. So basically my options is calling that function. That is the function we created, so that's where it's going to list it in the options. So let's go Control or Control C. Let's paste this in there, and fingers crossed, update that file. It should all work. No, it's giving me an error. Okay, so that error when I pasted that in was when I showed you how to create that options. I'd actually left that extra bracket in there, which didn't need to be in there when I was showing you how to include it. So if I just go and delete that out, so you can see it there, there's the extra little bracket there. Delete that, click update. Oh, why did that not work? Okay, so it took me a little bit to work out what was going on there, but you could see I've got my Headway button icon, the select font awesome icon, default is none. We're calling still got the same function, everything's still the same. All it was for some reason I still had an extra bracket in there. So I've managed to work that out, so I've pasted that into my editor, into my block options there. Let's just grab that, Control Alt, Control C, Control Alt, Control V. Let's update. Let's hit refresh. And when we get there, now we see we've got all the list of icons we could possibly want. So you can see how this is starting to take shape. We're still working in the content block. We are just adding in our different functionality. But now we've basically got our button. We've got our, if we remember from our HTML file before, which I didn't have, I've deleted it. Hey, href, we had it hash, and we had class equals our hover effect, whatever it might have been, and then we had your button, and then we closed off the ref. So we've got the URL file, we've got the effect. We could also add in the class, we could also add in a font awesome icon. So we would add FA. Actually, we wouldn't add it there. What we would do is we would then add that into here. We would go class. I would add class equals FA dash your button, your icon choice, and we would close that off. Now we would add span. but you get the idea. So we'd have that within, once again, we would have that within our button. Doesn't seem to look right for some reason. Something's not quite right there. So if this was a PHP, it would actually look like this. Let's do it as PHP so I could check how it's looking. So we would go echo href, and then we would echo p. No, we would just echo the title, and then we would echo fa-icon, and then we would echo our A. So that's how it would look. That's how it would look in our PHP file. So it adds the extra one there. So we've got our link, we've got our button title, we've got our font class, and we've closed the A link. That's our button in a nutshell. So we've got all these effects, all these in place besides our different hover effects. So now we need to create our hover effect. So let's have a look at our CSS file. So I'm just going to open that. So we've got our hover master here in our CSS, and we've got our full list of hover transition effects in there, and I just want to try and create a list on that. So what I'm going to do before the next video, I'm going to let you get started on creating all those different elements there, so creating your link in your headers and things like that. And what we'll do next is we'll start and then we'll create a new tab and we'll call that styling, and we'll start styling our button, which will be our hover effects and our color choices and things like that. So that takes care of all our content in our button. So that wraps up our video session for number 2. So thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you in the next video.